Good. Good afternoon, students. I welcome you all to this virtual platform. Once again, we thank God for His mercies endureth forever in our life. Today, what do we have on the screen? A subject, information and communication technology. That is our subject for discussion in today's lesson. I hope and I believe you are following every activity on this virtual platform and you are taking your study serious as well. Now, before I take you through this important subjects that we have on the screen, I want you to also note that as we are moving on, there are certain things that maybe you will not see it in the slides. Please make sure as I read through and as I take you through and then explaining everything to your understanding, you will jot something down. Good. Now today, what do we have? We have a term on the screen, that is booting. Now, when we talk about booting, how do you understand booting? This one doesn't talk about booting your brother or your sister or your colleague or no. This one becomes a technological term. What is booting in ICT? Before we go through these slides, I want us to just come out with the objectives as we always do in today's lesson. Good. Now, by the end of the lesson, the student should be able to define booting. 2. Define boot loader, boot device, and boot sequence and their importance. And lastly, we should be able to state the booting processes of a computer system. Good. Let's move on and see what we have in the next slide. Good. Now, when we say booting, what is booting? Booting becomes a term. We are saying that booting is the process of loading a copy of the operating system into the memory of the computer. That is booting. I take it again. When we say booting, booting is the process of loading a copy of the operating system into the memory of the computer. Now, why are we using memory as a major component over here? Good. Now, we are using memory because that is where data is being entered first before processing activities of the computer takes place. So when there is an input, the memory receives the input. That is the initial stage. That is the first place that data is being input before processing takes place. So we are saying that booting is the process of loading a copy of the operating system into the memory of the computer. Good. Now, when we say computer, what is computer? A computer is an electronic device that accepts data as input, processes it into useful information, and stores it for future use. So in computing, we accept data as input, we process the data, we store the data. Now we are saying that the booting can also be defined as the process that starts the operating system when a user turns on a computer system. Installation has taken place already. So there is an operating system on the machine. So if you don't boot the machine, the operating system can't function, so as other application software. So when booting takes place, it allows the operating system to function very well so that you can also run application software on the machine. Good. Good. Now, we also have another term as far as booting is concerned. That is a bootloader. We are also saying that a bootloader is also known as a boot program or bootstrap loader. It's a special operating system software that loads into the working memory of a computer after booting. That is the startup over here. So after booting, it loads into the working memory of a computer so that processing activities will take place. Good. Wow. A bootloader also has importance. What is the importance of this bootloader? Don't forget that we are saying that the bootloader, it is the first sector of the hard drive. The first sector of the hard drive. Good. Now, what is its importance? We are saying that it is used as a separate program in the program memory that executes when a new application needs to be reloaded into the rest of program memory. I will take it again. We are saying that the bootloader is used as a separate program in the program memory. That means within this device we have a lot of programs, a lot of activities goes on over there. But each of them has its function to play. So we are saying that it is a separate program in the program memory that executes when a new application needs to be reloaded into the rest of the memory program. So its function is to always execute when we are trying to get a new application to be installed on the machine. We are saying that we have ways and means that we can activate this bootloader inside the memory programs. If you want it to execute its tasks, we have to use the serial ports, the USB ports, and other means to load the application. An example: if my machine is being infected with computer virus, what I have to do is to get the software. Now, the software wasn't part of the operating system during installation process, but rather I have to get it from a different source with my peripheral, as in using the USB device. Then I will just copy those software, that is the antivirus program, on the pen drive. If I want to get a copy of this application on my machine, I have to insert the pen drive at the back of the system unit so that I'll be able to run the software on my machine. But before that, there must be an operating system that will give us an interface called the graphical user interface. That is the GUI. Now, what is the function of the GUI? It provides an interface for the user to be able to communicate with the machine. That is the function of the GUI. So whenever an operating system is being installed on a machine, it gives us an interface where we can see icons so that we'll be able to work with the machine. We'll be able to communicate with the machine. We'll be able to continue our processing activities by following certain instructions that will be made available. Good. Let's move on to our next slide. Good. Now, what we have on the screen, a boot device. When we say a device becomes a machine. But as far as booting is concerned, when we say boot device, we are saying that it is a device from which the operating system is loaded. A device that can handle the operating system. A device that will have all the inbuilt function of the operating system. So we put the operating system on this device before it can be installed on the machine for us to get the graphical user interface to be able to interact, communicate with the machine. Now, these are some of the examples of these devices that we are talking about. We have the local hard disk drive, which comes with a default letter drive C. We have the optical drive. We have the floppy disk drive. Then we also have the USB drive and a network interface card. All these are called boot device because we will be able to keep our operating system on them so that we can run it on our machine for us to get the graphical user interface to continue with our processing activities. Good. Now, we are also saying that a boot device is any piece of hardware that contains the files required for a computer to start. A piece of hardware. When we talk about hardware, we are talking about the physical component of the computer. The monitor becomes a hardware component of the computer. The system unit becomes a hardware component of a computer. But we are talking about the device that can keep the operating system, that we can load the operating system on before we can install them on the computer to be able to run those application software on the machine. So we are saying that it is any piece of hardware. That means we can handle it. That contains the files required for a computer to start, for a computer to boot. So there's to start the computer. That means you want to start the booting process. I hope you are following, and I hope you are jotting something down. Good. Now let's move on to the next slide and continue what we have over there. Good. Now, as you see it on the screen, is the explanation to everything that I just said. Now, we are saying that when an operating system is installed onto the hard drive, it copies the boot files. An important point over here, we have files. Good. Now, when we talk about files, a file becomes a collection of what? Information stored on a computer. So we are saying that when an operating system is installed onto the hard drive, it copies the boot files and drivers required to load Windows onto the computer, to load the Windows, to load the operating system. It doesn't load the hard part of the machine, but the contents. So it loads Windows onto the computer. Another important point over here to note, we have Windows, then we have window. Now, when we say window, a window becomes a rectangular frame where programs are viewed, where we can see features like the Microsoft Office Word. When we talk about Windows, as it has been underlined, it's an operating system with a graphical user interface. Now we are saying that when installing a new operating system or performing troubleshooting over here as in solving a problem of the computer or booting from another drive, when a bootable disk is being set up into the machine and the boot sequence are correctly arranged, it will load the contents of that bootable disk. It deals with only the contents, but not the hard parts of the device. The contents of the disk is what will load into the memory of the computer. Don't forget that I said the memory becomes the first place where data and instructions are always placed before processing activities will go on, or before we start any processing activities. Good. Wow. We mentioned boot sequence. What is boot sequence? When we say boot sequence, what is boot sequence? Let's see it as we have displayed on the screen. We are saying that a boot sequence is the initial, that is the first stage, the initial set of operations, the first stage of operations that the computer performs when it is switched on. The first stage, the boot sequence, it follows in that sequential order. So the first stage, the initial set of operations, initial set of activities taking place that the computer performs, where it starts from when we start the machine, when we switch on the power button of the system unit. The initial stage, the initial set of operations, that becomes a boot sequence. Good. Wow. More light on the boot sequence. We are saying that the boot sequence, also known as the boot options or the boot order, defines which device a computer should check for the operating system's boot files. It also specifies the order where devices are always what? Checked. That becomes a boot sequence. It will scan through to know the order in which operations must begin as far as booting is concerned. We are saying that it is also known as the boot options, the options in which you need to select first the boot order, how it has been arranged, which devices a computer should check first for the operating system's boot files. The device that carries the operating system that needs to be installed for us to run those application software. That is the function of the boot sequence. Good. Wow. That is a display diagram for you on the boot sequence. Now, as you can see it on the screen, as it is being displayed, we have the first boot sequence over there, the second boot sequence, the third boot sequence, and the fourth boot sequence. Now, each of them is directing you to the device used. We have the first boot sequence, we have the second boot sequence, we have the third boot sequence, and we have the fourth boot sequence. And the devices that we can use is what has been displayed on the screen for you. We have the removable devices, the hard drives, the CD-ROM, and the network boot card. That is a diagram, a display diagram to explain, to show you how the boot sequence are always arranged. Good. Now, that is a display of the summary of the diagram that was displayed earlier on. The boot sequence. Now, we are saying that the computer first looks at removable devices. When we say removable devices, they are those peripheral devices that are always inserted, that we insert at the back of the system units, so that we can install our operating system on the machine. Now, if nothing is found on this device, then the machine, the computer will move to what? The hard drive. Now, if an operating system such as Windows is installed, the computer loads the operating system from the hard drive and places it in the memory. That is, if we have an operating system on the hard drive, the machine will pick it and place it into the memory of the computer so that we can start the installation. Now, if nothing is found on this hard drive, the machine will now move on to the CD-ROM. That is another boot sequence, another bootable disk, so that we will be able to get our operating system and run the application software. Now, if any of these options fails, then the machine will always try and boot it on a network. So the user has to make sure that there is what? An internet access, and boot it on that particular network. Now, if all this fails, then that means that we can't get to the desktop. There is a problem with our machine. So, as it was displayed earlier on, the computer first looks at all the removable devices that has been used on the machine. Then, if nothing is found on those devices, it will now move to the hard drive with a default letter, drive C. Good. The drive C. That is the default letter to represent the main hard drive inside the machine. Now, if nothing is found on the hard drive, if we can't get the operating system on the hard drive, then the machine will move to the CD-ROM, the bootable disk over there, as you see it on the screen. Now, if all this option fails, then we have to try a network installation. So it will boot from a network. Now, if nothing happens to whatever we want to do, if we were not able to install or put the operating system on the machine, then we need to get a technician, because all those booting sequence failed. There must be a technician because we couldn't get to the desktop. That explains the booting sequence as you saw earlier on in our display slides. Good. what do we have here? The 5 steps of the boot sequence. The 5 steps of the boot sequence. The first step is the power up. The power up. When we talk about the power up, how do you understand? We said the first step of any boot process is applying power to the machine. Applying power to the machine. The system unit will be there. The monitor will be there. What you have to do after checking all cable connection, you just press on the power button so that processing activity will start. When the user turns a computer on, a series of events begins that ends with the operating system getting control from the boot process so that the user will be free to work, because there has been a force on the power button of the machine. When the computer is turned on, the central processor, which is the brain of the computer, executes a startup code in ROM that is located on the motherboard. Now, when we talk about the motherboard, it is a component found inside the computer where all other components are being mounted on, like the memory, the hard disk, the jumpers, the capacitors. Good. The second step, power on self-test. Power on self-test. That is the post or the power on the self-test. We are saying that this test checks all connected hardware. Alright, now when we talk about the hardware, we said that it is the physical component of the computer, including RAM and the secondary storage devices, to be sure it is functioning properly. So it checks all these connections before we can start booting. There must be a checkup on all these devices, whether they are correctly positioned, arranged, connected, before we can start booting. We are saying that after post has completed its job, the boot process searches the boot device with the BIOS. Good. Now, what do we have? We have the third point, that is to find a boot device. We are saying that the input-output system is essential to the operation of the computer. Why? Why is it so? Why is it important? The input-output device. Why is it important? Because it defines the rules for communications between the CPU, also known as the central processing unit, the central processing unit, that is the CPU, between the device and other devices that is attached to the computer through the motherboard. As I said earlier on, a component where all other components are being mounted on, and it is found inside the system units. So we are saying that it is the essential part of the operation of the computer. Why? Because it defines, it gives meaning to the rules for communication between the CPU and other devices that are always attached to the computer through the motherboard. That means all these devices have their connections on the motherboard. We are saying that they are also found in the IO system files on the boot device, and it provides extensions to the BIOS. When we say BIOS, we are talking about basic input-output system. The basic input-output system that helps in the operation of the computer. Good. Now, after a device is being found with the operating system, don't forget that when the device is known, it is the content of the device that we are going to use, not the device itself. The device carries the content, so it is the content that we are going to use. After getting the device, we load the operating system. So we are saying that once the hardware functionality is confirmed and the input-output system is loaded, the boot process begins loading the operating system from the boot device. Hello. Good. I hope you are following. So after getting our device, the operating system is being loaded. So the boot process begins loading the operating system from the boot device and place it in the memory. So that execution can take place. Wow, is it not amazing? Are you following? Good. And I hope and I believe you are jotting something down. So the boot process begins loading the operating system from the boot device, and the OS is loaded into the memory. Don't forget that the memory is being used earlier on, and we said that the memory becomes the first place where data and instructions are being placed before processing activities takes place, before execution takes place. So the memory needs to accept all this data. Good. What do we have in our next slide? Wow, the transfer control. That becomes the last point of the steps as far as the booting process is concerned. Transfer control. Once the previous steps are complete and the operating system is safely loaded into the memory, the boot process gives up control of the OS. The OS then proceeds to execute any pre-configured setup routines to define user configurations or application executions. At the end of the handoff, the computer is ready for use. All that it means is that after all the previous processes that we have discussed and the operating system has now landed into the memory of the computer, the booting process starts. So there is a control of the operating system. Now we can run the operating system on the machine. So we are saying that the OS then executes. Okay, execute any pre-configured setup routines to define user configurations. Everything that the user needs to know about the software that will be run on the machine. It will make it available for the user to be able to continue the processing activities of the computer whenever there is an input. So at the end of the day, the machine is ready for use, so that users will be able to see and get everything that is communicates, to be able to communicate with the machine. Because after the installation is complete, after installation is successful, there is always the graphical user interface. There is always an interface that will enable the user to be able to communicate with the system. So the interface will make it available for the user to run those application software on the machine. Wow. I hope you have studied something today, and I hope you have been able to jot certain things down. Let's move on to our next slide and see what I have for you. Good. What do we have? Wow, gradually we are getting to the end of our lesson. Evaluation. Our first evaluation. After switching on the computer, an internal process starts in it. This process loads the operating system onto the memory. What is this process called? Evaluation 2. The post checks the entire memory and tests the connections of the various hardware devices attached with the computer. What is the full form of posts? Evaluation 3. Steve is very fond of magnets. He often takes the magnet piece with himself wherever he goes. One day, he takes the magnet in the computer room. His friend advised him not to take the magnet in the computer room. Steve wants to know the reason for it. Kindly state the reason. Good. Let's move on to the next question. Wow. This is a conversation between Peterson and Jackson. In fact, these two children are discussing about bootloader. They still want to know the activities of the bootloader. Now, let's hear from Peterson. A computer's central processor can only execute program code found in ROM and RAM. When we say ROM, that is the read-only memory. And when we say RAM, that is the random access memory. Modern OS, an application program code and data are stored on non-volatile data storage devices, such as hard disk and CD-ROMs, etc. That is to Peterson. Now, let's look at Jackson. Jackson. When a computer is first powered on, it does not have an operating system in ROM and RAM. Wow. It's a nice conversation though. The computer must initially execute a small program stored in ROM, along with the bare minimum of data needed to access the non-volatile devices from which the operating system, programs, and data are loaded into memory. That is from Jackson. They are just trying to come out with a little conversation. I want you to go through this, read, come out with your understanding, and give a reason why they are correct or wrong, or Peterson is correct or Jackson is wrong. Good. Let's move on to the next slide. Wow. Oh, wow. Good. End of slides. Seriously. I hope you have enjoyed yourself. We thank God once again for taking us through this wonderful exercise. He has been so faithful, so glorious in our life. He has been piloting our steps every day. We thank Him for His knowledge, His love, and His blessings upon our life. Fellow students, once again, the name is Semiki. Kindly take your studies very serious, and the blessings of God will always manifest His glory. Be an obedient child. And until I come your way next time with a new subject and a new topic, God be with you. Bye for now.